I still shake when I tell this. A blue-violet light pulsed in the center of my room, hanging there as if the air itself had frozen. It was not a dream. My bank accounts, now overflowing, are the proof. For 3 nights, a being from another dimension appeared at my bedside and handed me an ancient code, 3 rituals, small in outward gesture, enormous in consequence. Simple words, simple breaths, and a life rewritten. Have you ever wondered whether wealth follows invisible laws that only a few mortals can read? I did not, until that light called my name. My name is Rafael Navarro. I am 52. I work with numbers. I used to believe numbers told the whole story of a life. 6 months ago, my life looked like a ledger in flames. 30 years of saving my safety net vanished into a fraud. The retirement fund I had pictured and protected was gone. The bank sent letters that smelled of stale paper and finality. My apartment smelled of old coffee and dust. The lampshade yellowed at the seam. My sons called with small, careful voices that hid disappointment. I answered with optimism I did not feel. I lied to my mother to keep her voice steady. At night, I swallowed pills to quiet the loop of dread. Mornings began the same. A cup of bitter coffee that burned the back of my throat. The bus coughs and the city's metal breath. I sat at my desk for 8 hours while a younger boss announced another round of layoffs in a hall made of fluorescent light. My hands learned to hide the tremor. My spine learned a slow, permanent curve. The digital clock on my bedside table blinked numbers like a judge. 3:33. The light from the street lamp pooled against the curtains. I felt my lungs tighten. Every day, I opened my email to find the same files of shame, overdue notices, polite threats, automated empathy. My routine became ritualized misery. I would promise myself, on Friday night, that the next week would be different. I would watch motivational videos, voice small vows to an empty room, and then sleep with a knot in my throat. Habits were my prison. I kept a list of small denials in my head. I cannot spend. I must be cautious. This is what age looks like. They repeated like a scratched record. The apartment walls seemed to move closer each month. The lamp by the couch cast a smaller circle of light. The light itself felt like a judgment. My body kept a tally. My heart learned shortness. My breath shortened when bills arrived. Sleeplessness left dark hollows under my eyes. I woke with a mouth that tasted like metal. My fingers found the corners of old envelopes for comfort. Each small ritual confirmed the story I told myself. Scarcity is true. Then, on a Wednesday when the clock read 3:33, the air around my bed began to change. I thought first that the heater had clicked on. The room dropped a degree. The lamp's filament hummed, then stilled. I lay there, the mattress a low island beneath me. I felt the air thicken, a density as if the room had been filled with very fine silk. My skin prickled. Sound condensed to a taut wire higher, then lower, like a tuning fork that remembered a forgotten note. The hum started near the ceiling, a small, deep thrum that made the plaster vibrate just enough to be a language. I put my hand on my chest and tasted copper. I felt a fear that was not panic, but reverence and attention that stretched the center of me. My thoughts scattered and then held. That kind of silence that waits like a held breath before a wave breaks. I did what I always do when the impossible nudges my day. I reached for the rational explanation. A neighbor's party, an electrical surge, a draft through a loose window. I told myself stories to feel safe. And yet, the hum became a pattern of concentric waves folding through the air like water. I remember the light as not simply light, but as a presence of color you could lean into. Blue and violet braided together and pulsed with a heartbeat that matched mine. It was both close and impossibly distant. It sat in the center of my room like a small planet. I typed a short note on the laptop in the dark reflexive, a habit. If this is real, tell me. I felt foolish and more honest than I had been in months. There is a small thing I ask of you if this story moves something inside you. If you are awake enough to listen, subscribe to this channel and leave where you are from in the comments, the city and country. It helps us reach 1,000, and it helps me keep telling what happened. Your name matters. Your city matters. Thank you. I do not expect strangers to rescue me. What I did not know then was that rescue sometimes arrives as an instruction. Something shifted on that first night. The hum resolved into rhythm. The air curved. I felt the space around my watch, my empty wallet on the nightstand, my battered laptop respond as if plucked by the same invisible finger. A small photograph on the shelf my children flickered as if breathing. I wrote a note to myself and stuck it on the refrigerator the next morning. Do not tell Eduardo. He will call this madness. I was already preparing an argument to keep private whatever came next. I walked through the day with a new edge. Hope and skepticism warred in me. I could not name which was stronger. I kept a tiny fear folded like a coin in my pocket. Fear of being foolish, fear of being saved. Those two fears sat opposite each other, and in the space between them something new began to whisper. Mini cliffhanger. A sound like water folding into itself will answer a name I have not said out loud in years. The sound began near the ceiling. At first I thought of faulty wiring, then of some animal in the vents. My ears strained. The air in the room bent, like a curtain caught in wind, and then it pulled slow and deliberate over the bed. The ceiling seemed to tilt inward in a way that did not belong to any physics I had memorized for safety. My skin reacted first, a low, migrating chill that started at the nape of my neck and spread down my arms. Breath seemed heavier, like walking through humid sea air. The light in the room pooled, and then it moved with intention, rearranging itself into rings that widened and narrowed. I wanted to speak, to say a name, to ground myself in the ordinary. The word, who, rose in my throat and came out shorter than I expected. My voice sounded small in the thick air. Then someone answered, without air moving between us. The voice arrived inside my head, not heard with ears but felt as if the floor beneath my feet had learned to speak. Raphael. It was not a voice shaped by language alone. It was an imprint, tone, image, memory folded into a single utterance. The name landed in me and opened like an old key. The pressure in my chest softened for a blink. Every hair on my arms lifted. My body began to vibrate in sympathy with the sound. The light congealed into a form. It was humanoid in outline, but taller, a figure of flowing contours and subtle angles. Not flesh, not machine. The skin of the form shimmered like a lake under evening sky, violet and blue threaded with thin veins of light. I remember thinking of the films, of the kitsch of alien tropes. None of it matched. This presence moved with a grace that ignored gravity. It hovered, and where it passed, the dust motes in the room rearranged themselves into small constellations. The being tilted its head, a motion of curious greeting. There was a sense of age in that tilt, a patience older than any calendar. The eyes, if they could be called that, were deep wells of light. Looking into them felt like stepping toward an event horizon. Time slowed. My pulse was audible to me, loud and human, and yet I did not feel fear. I felt the reverence of someone being called to a long-anticipated conversation. You might expect me to say I shouted, or fainted, or laughed. I did none of these. I breathed. I listened. I let the impossible occupy me. The presence did not speak into the room. Its words came as images, impressions, then syllables in my head. I learned, instantly, that it could cross the gap between mind and mind. The first thought I received was not a lesson, but a description. Your thoughts called me across distances, it said. The tone was neither accusing nor indulgent. It was like a scientist reading data and an old friend naming a familiar face. Who are you? I managed aloud. My mouth shaped the question the way my hands shaped a cup, awkward and necessary. I am Aria, the presence answered. The name landed with a strange lightness, a single-syllable bell. Guardian of the code of abundance. The phrase code of abundance sounded at once ridiculous and exact. It felt like the kind of sentence a mind colder than mine would use, and yet it hummed in my chest like a truth tuned to my bones. Why speak what is true in the field of possibility as if it is present? Speak what is true. I repeated into the room, and my mouth tasted of the old copper fear. I closed my eyes because the light, the way it pooled behind my eyelids, made seeing too much at once a kind of dizziness. Aria guided me slowly. It asked me to position my body, to become a vessel rather than a critic. Breathe as if you already carry the currency of your desire, it instructed. The words were sparse. They were not commands. They landed like instructions from a patient teacher. I sat up. My spine felt like a rope pulled taut. I placed both hands on my knees and inhaled. The cold in the room receded a degree. The hum became a steady tone, like a tuning fork held against bone. Declare, Aria said. Not as hope, not as plea, as presence. I felt ridiculous, yet I did it. I said, aloud and steady, I am financially free. The words felt thin at first. They were a new set of clothes I did not own. Aria's presence pressed close, not intrusive, more like wind wrapping around a person on a hill. Try again, Aria suggested, but feel the phrase in your shoulders. Let the muscles carry the claim. So I spoke it again. I am financially free. This time I let my chest expand. I allowed a small heat to arise where fear had lived. The sentence stopped being a sentence and became a state. My breath found room. Then my phone buzzed on the floor. A name I had not seen in years flashed on the screen. A client, someone who had once paid me in full, was calling with a small, urgent project. The project offered an immediate payment right into the account I used for rent. The amount was not obscene. It was exact. It matched the sum I had been tallying in my head for that month. I laughed then, a small, astonished sound that did not quite reach the rest of my body. Aria's light seemed to pulse like a sympathetic laugh. Coincidence? I asked, already knowing what I feared about the answer. Coincidences are simply resonances you have not yet learned to read, Aria said. There was a kindness in that. No brag, no gloating, only a gentle re-education. My mind began its work. The skeptic in me lined up arguments, pattern-seeking, selective memory, desperate grasping. The other part of me, thin and hungry, felt the warmth of possibility and decided, for the first time in months, to follow it, to try an experiment. Aria did not push. It taught in fragments, the way a carpenter teaches, hands-on, showing the motion more than the theory. State moves field, it said. Not wish. State. I repeated to myself, as if laying a brick, a short loop. I speak it. I inhabit it. I receive it. The loop felt like a small engine starting. I lay awake after Aria faded, the light unwinding like silk. The room smelled of ozone and old paper. My palms carried a faint warmth for hours. The phone call had happened. The deposit was pending. The world had, for reasons I did not yet understand, answered to a sentence I had spoken as if it were a fact. I also felt a new vulnerability. If this was real, if intention altered circumstance, then responsibility sat heavy on my shoulders. Words would matter. States would matter. There was a moral seriousness to practice. Before Aria left that first night, it offered one more image. You have a grammar, it said softly. 3 simple patterns. Speak, feel, think. Each has shape. Each changes the field. It did not tell me the exact language. It only drew the contour and left me to fill the verbs. As the figure dissolved into the air, the room returned to normal light, to the ordinary sound of a city that does not know how to listen. My chest was lighter and heavier, both at once. Mini cliffhanger. Tomorrow night, Aria will return and teach me how to feel what I imagine, an exercise small enough to test, yet large enough to shift everything. The first lesson did not arrive as a lecture. It arrived as a rearrangement of everything I thought was solid. I remember the room like a photograph with the edges still wet. The lamp threw a narrow halo across the couch. The radiator clicked once and then fell quiet. Outside, the city breathed distant horns, a dog barking. The air in my bedroom had gone thin and sharp, like the moment right before a storm. My skin felt porous, Sound lost its usual weight and became texture, a soft scraping, a low bell where the wall met the ceiling. Aria pointed not with a finger, but with a suggestion of light. The window, which I had always assumed framed the same tired sky, opened into an ordering I had never noticed. Stars none brighter than they should be moved. They slid like pieces on a board, erecting patterns that made my chest feel small and then large. Lines of light threaded between them, clean and geometry-like. I could taste copper on my tongue, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and the ozone scent after a summer rain. "Observe," Aria said inside my head. The voice was soft and also total. It did not demand. It invited my attention like a hand across the back of a chair. I watched, and as I watched, something in me shifted from watching to noticing. My accountant's mind wanted to name constellations, to measure angles. Another part childlike, blunt, felt a permission. The permission said, "Reality can listen." Aria's instructions came in fragments that felt carved from wind. "Your universe is not matter alone. It responds. Frequency is grammar." I wanted to laugh, partly because the sentence was too poetic and partly because it felt dangerously hopeful. But when the being spoke, the world around me leaned in. The mobile of dust above the table condensed into a slow swirl and then opened like a page. Objects I had learned to ignore: my cracked watch, a coin I had found years ago and forgotten, shivered as if someone had read them aloud. "Words without state are echoes," Aria said. The light that was Aria pulsed with each syllable, and the pulse matched my own heartbeat. The first ritual is the conscious declaration. I had read phrases before, self-help quotes, lines in articles that suggested saying, "I am enough," until the phrase stuck. I had practiced pep talks in the mirror. All of it had felt like borrowing words from a shop window. Aria did not offer slogans. It taught method. "Stand," it said simply. I stood. My knees remembered the odd creak from gym classes long ago. I placed my palms flat on my thighs and felt the material of my trousers, rough cotton, the familiar seam. Aria guided my breathing, in long, slow counts, out with the small hiss of surrender. The room cooled by a degree, and the hairs on my forearms prickled. The light at the ceiling became a soft drumbeat. "Declare what is true in the field of possibility as if it is present," Aria instructed. "But feel it. Not the words, the state." I closed my eyes because the light made my vision shiver. Behind my lids, there was a color violet braided with blue, like bruised silk. I let the breath lengthen. I let the memory of being able to pay my son's tuition sit in my chest like heat. I found the posture of a man who carries no ledger of lack. It was awkward at first. My voice came out thin. "I am financially free," I said. Silence answered, thick and observant. I felt my mouth shape those words like a person trying on a coat that might not fit. Aria did not congratulate me. It adjusted me. "Say it again," it said. "But feel the words in the shoulders. Let the chest carry the claim." This time, I let my back straighten the way it had before. Months and years of worry weighed it down. I breathed so that my diaphragm opened like a door. I imagined the sensation of a bill landing and dissolving under my fingers. I allowed a small warmth to fill the place where I cannot had lived. My voice carried. The sentence took on a new mass. "I am financially free." The statement landed. It vibrated in my bones. The hum in the room steadied into a single frequency that made the glass on my shelf sing the tiniest, crystalline note. Then my phone buzzed on the floor. It was a sound I had learned to hate because it usually brought another notice, another demand. I bent and saw a message from a client I had ghosted years ago. Short, crisp, urgent. "Need your files. Pay now." The amount was not enormous. It was exact. It was the amount that would keep the landlord away for another month. I laughed before I could stop myself, a small, surprised sound that tasted like something being unglued. Aria's light pulsed in sympathy. The reality outside my skin had answered a state inside me. My body accepted the event as proof. "Coincidence?" I asked, The question, for the first time in months, curiosity felt like a blade I could use. Tomorrow, Aria said, would ask me to feel what I imagined. The promise of the next experiment lay in the air like a held note. Mini cliffhanger. The next night would not ask me to say anything new. It would ask me to touch an imagined thing until my body believed the touch was real. The second visit was quieter in setup and louder in consequence. I had told myself all afternoon that I would treat the whole thing like a science experiment. I would be methodical. I would keep notes. I made my apartment tidy in a distracted way, stacked a few unpaid envelopes, wiped the kitchen counter, moved a mug to the sink. Clean surfaces make decisions easier, I told myself. The air smelled faintly of lemon from the cleaner, and the roadway beyond my window was wet with an earlier drizzle. At 3:33, the light came again, not as a storm, but as a precise instrument. Tonight we will do the visual sensory protocol, Aria said. The phrase was almost clinical, and yet it sang in my chest. The instructions were simple and oddly intimate. Choose one small thing, the presence said. Not a wish, not a grand outcome, a test. Let the field answer an accessible request. I thought of many possible tests: clearing a bill, a returned phone call, a check in the mail. My mind wanted grand gestures. Aria suggested smallness. The field listens to texture, it said. Begin where sensation is certain. I chose the envelope in an old book. I could see the envelope's corner in my mind. The yellowed paper, the folds softened by time. My hands remembered the weight of paper between fingers. The image felt honest and doable. Aria guided posture. I sat cross-legged on the floor, feet tucked, palms resting on knees. The radiator sighed, the room cool but not cold. Breathe into the fact of the moment, the presence instructed. See, then feel. Let surprise be part of the exercise. The method was precise. Close the eyes. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. Picture the moment of discovery with detail that included texture and smell. Imagine the sensation of paper sliding under the fingertip. Allow the chest to open into gratitude before the event occurs. Fold emotion into image. I followed like someone practicing scales. At first my imagination skipped like a scratched record. I thought of where I might have hidden money years ago. I pictured a forgotten coat pocket. I imagined sticky notes and old receipts. Aria corrected only in tone, not frantic. Intimate. Find the line between memory and possibility. I slowed. My breath lengthened. The image sharpened. Dust motes drifting. The book's spine creaking. The envelope warm with my hand's heat as I slide it out. I imagined the texture soft, fibrous paper. I felt the surprise rise like a small flame. Gratitude came early, as if I were claiming a present already received. Stay in the feeling until your muscles accept it, Aria said. I repeated a loop aloud, a new one. I feel it. I reach. I receive. I let the words fall into my bones. The hum in the ceiling threaded through the rhythm of my breathing. My palms had gone slightly clammy with anticipation, a human reaction that made the exercise feel real. I went to sleep with the image secured behind my eyes. The next morning, light slipped between the blinds like a gentle hand. I rose with a curious lightness and went to the bookcase to pull down a cheap paperback I had not opened in years. My fingers found the spine, the book slid, and the corner of an envelope pushed out a sliver of yellow. My heart hit the base of my throat. I eased the envelope free and held the paper between my fingers. The texture was exactly as I had imagined. Inside were 3 notes I had tucked away years earlier and forgotten. The precise currency, the exact fold. When the bank called that afternoon to offer a renegotiation plan that would lower my monthly payments significantly, the pattern felt less like luck and more like accumulation. 2 small proofs stacked into something that refused to be explained away by tired skepticism. Aria taught through experience rather than through doctrine. Emotion combined with image moves the field. It said as if reciting a law. You did not invent money. You altered the probability of its being noticed by you. I began to keep a log not as data for others, but as a tether to honesty. Small entries. Envelope. Texture warm. Bank call. Terms changed. The practical consequences were beginning to stitch to the internal work. That week, I tried a different test at work. I spent an hour in the morning practicing the posture and the breath, picturing a single manager I had wanted to impress reading my highlighted report and saying, "We need you on this project." I felt the sound of the words in my ears before I typed my emails. That afternoon, the manager stopped by my desk, glanced at my files, and said, "Can you take the lead on a short evaluation? It needs your precision." It wasn't the multi-million-dollar contract I sometimes dreamed of. It was, however, an invitation that led to a small bonus. Again, small, precise, verifiable. I am not naive. The world is not some vending machine where you drop in a feeling and exact solutions pop out. But results began appearing where before there had only been years of static. Small shifts compounded. Aria taught me to keep the tests modest, to care for consistency. Make the field habituated to your voice, it said. Match your feeling to simple deliverables. Repeat. The being used the language of habit rather than magic. Habits implied discipline. Habits implied responsibility. That suited me. Between exercises, I felt changes in my body. My breath moved deeper. The tightness at the base of my neck loosened. Sleep became less medicated and more a place I could enter without drowning. The trivial things, my posture, the way I carried my wallet, started to matter. I invented small rituals to anchor the practice. Each morning I would stand by the window, palms on the sill, and whisper a short loop. I plant the feeling. I water the vision. I allow the harvest. It sounded ridiculous in the abstract, but the loop carried a new muscle response. The way the shoulders dropped when I said words of allowance. People quietly responded. A neighbor returned a misplaced package with a smile. A client included an unexpected software license in a project I had helped architect for months. These were not miraculous windfalls. They were increments that changed my margin. They also altered my inner ledger. I no longer logged only losses. Aria never offered a guarantee. Instead, it offered exercises and insisted on accountability. Practice, it said once. Do not confuse faith with fantasy. Test. Record. Adjust. I wrote all of this down in a cheap notebook I found in the drawer. Dates, sensations, the precise phrases I used. I numbered nothing. I tried to be clinical and was often clumsy. The practice required quiet persistence. By the time the third night approached, I had enough small, repeatable signals to notice a pattern. Not miracles, proofs. Enough that I could not entirely dismiss what was happening. My reserve of disbelief was not depleted. It had become more nuanced. But people notice change. They either lean toward it or recoil. I had rehearsed what to say to Eduardo, my older brother, because his voice had weighed in my life. I had imagined his skepticism in detail so that I could feel the impact and not be unmoored by it. I had pictured the conversation as a test in itself. Could the field hold when the world accused? Mini cliffhanger. I was not sure whether sharing the evidence with Eduardo would strengthen my conviction or shatter the fragile rhythm I had built. The restaurant smelled like oil and coffee. Eduardo's jacket was immaculately ironed. He slid into the booth opposite me like he owned the space, and, in a way, he owned certainty. "Tell me," he said. His voice had the familiar flatness of someone who measures people against rulebooks. "What is it this time? Another scheme? Another there's a shortcut story?" I felt the practice tighten and steadied myself with breath. My hands were steady because of the simple loops Aria had taught me earlier in the week. The loop was now a resource. I state. I embody. I receive. I had variations ready. I had evidence ready. I had 3 crisp examples that did not need to be evangelized. The envelope, the bank call, the project invite. I told him as plainly as possible, choosing the calmest images. I described the light, the way the air had thickened, the voice that spoke into my head as if from the room itself. I did not embellish. I let the sensory. I also felt something else rising, a stubborn tenderness toward my own experience that refused to be discounted. I left the restaurant with his words lodged behind my ribs. The sky was gray and low. The subway platform hummed like a waiting thing. I put a note on the refrigerator that night, half in irony and half in defense. Eduardo has a point. Stop the madness. I wanted to be reasonable. I also wanted to test whether the field would sustain me when faced with real-world ridicule. If Aria's lessons depended on secrecy or on blind faith, they would crumble under social pressure. If they were true, they would weather dissent. I decided to continue. The next days were quieter, more rigorous. I kept to the exercises and recorded minutiae, the exact breath counts, the texture I'd imagined, the specific phrase of gratitude. I returned to the envelope exercise and then did a different trial asking for a small favor from a colleague and observed the subtle ways the world adjusted. Resistance did not come only from Eduardo. It arrived as self-doubt at 3 a.m, when I lay awake with a thrum in my chest and the old scripts whispering, "You're making this up." It arrived as practical headaches, the landlord's terse emails, the bank's slow machinery. It arrived as the temptation to abandon practice when the tangible pain of late notices made spiritual experiments feel like luxuries. I kept practicing. Aria's presence helped build tolerance for the friction. Resistance is the test. It said once when the light came in a hush as if reading my mood. Not every objection is false. Some objections protect. Use them. The advice was not a dismissal of Eduardo. It was a refinement. I learned to hold my brother's words and the field's evidence simultaneously. I began to speak differently about what I was doing. When friends asked, I framed the practice as a set of experiments rather than as revelation. That made it less threatening. That made it credible. At home, I made a small altar of practical items. The envelope, the cheap notebook with the logs, a crystal I had bought once that now caught the light, and sent a tiny violet sliver across the wall. I did not worship the objects. I used them as anchors. There were social consequences. Eduardo's skepticism hardened into concern. He called less, and, when he did, the tone was sharper. Friends who had once pitted my financial collapse now looked at me with caution. Gossip is its own gravity. It tugged. I felt the subtle shrinkage around the edges of my life and the expansion in the center where the practice lived. I had to choose which rhythm to follow. To revert to old habits would be to admit defeat and to let inertia resume. To continue would be to risk ridicule and perhaps being labeled delusional. The cost was social, and social costs matter. Aria never promised that the work would be free of them. It promised that intention, practiced, changed measurable things. One afternoon, Eduardo sent a terse message. Be careful who you tell. He worried I might be led into a community that would take advantage of me. There was tenderness in the caution and threat in the warning. I replied, carefully, I am testing. Data first. I'm cautious. I will not hand over money to strangers. The field required both inner courage and outer prudence. The exercises had structure. They were not a substitute for common sense. I recommitted to a simple rule: no financial decisions without a sober plan and at least one skeptical counsel. I would not trade safety for belief. 2 weeks of small proofs and quiet resistance layered into a different certainty. My posture at the desk changed. The tremor in my hands when I logged into my bank receded. I began to dream not of rescue, but of rebuilding. Yet the external friction remained. It sharpened into a question that sat in the center of my life. Would I stand by a practice that strangers mocked if it solved the problem that had been swallowing me for months? The habit of scarcity had been a culture in my chest. To change it required not only method but social courage. Aria returned that night, the light slower, as if resuming a conversation after a dissonant chord. You have navigated doubt, it said. You have not been reckless. The final ritual gratitude projective will ask you to take the posture of someone who has already arrived. That is the choice point. I felt my throat tighten. Gratitude felt sacred in a way I was not sure I deserved. I had not yet cleared all my debts. I had not yet rebuilt my life. To thank the field for a not yet reality felt like lying. Or perhaps it was a rehearsal of a truth that would come. I could not tell which without doing it. I sat on the floor in the dark, palms flat on the cold wood, and let the question hang. Could I be grateful for what I had asked for before it was visible? Could gratitude be the bridge between the loops I had been speaking and the life that might follow? As the presence faded, Aria left the smallest of instructions. Gratitude projects a completed wave. Prepare for surrender and for reception. I taped a new loop to the inside cover of my notebook, one to carry me through the pressure. I thank what is forming. I open for what arrives. I steward it well. It was clumsy and honest in mine. The next night would be the most delicate test yet. I understood stakes both practical and social. If the third ritual failed, I risked retreat. If it worked, the ledger of my life could begin to reverse. Mini cliffhanger. The third ritual would ask me to be thankful for a future I could not yet see, and the world would answer in a way that would no longer permit polite skepticism. The night of the third ritual felt like the hinge of my life. The apartment had that thin, cold smell that comes before rain. The violet light settled behind my eyelids as if someone had painted the dark itself. I sat on the floor, palms down on the plank, and let the air press slightly against my face. My breath was the only noise, slow and patient. I remembered Aria's voice, not spoken so much as impressed. Thank the reality you request, it had said. Act as if the door is already open. I folded my spine into that posture, the being preferred, straight enough to hold a thought, loose enough to feel surrender. I breathed on the counts it had taught me. I held the image of a cleared ledger, of keys warm in my palm, of my children at a graduation. I spoke the gratitude as fact, not fantasy. Thank you for the path that has opened. Thank you for the abundance that now moves through my life. Thank you for the freedom I steward. I said it again and again, until the words wore thin and then became raw and true. The room grew warm from somewhere inside me. A heat traveled up my spine, entered the chest, and unraveled the tight bands I had worn for years. Tears leaked, quiet and inevitable. When Aria named the rituals complete, it did not bow or vanish in a show. The presence simply thinned like fog and left a shape in the air, a small spiral of violet light that hovered where its hand had been. I felt complete and terrified at once. Completion felt like responsibility. 3 days later, an email arrived. It opened to the tone of somebody who knew what they were doing. A founder I had worked with 7 years ago had passed my name to a multinational setting up a local office. They wanted a consulting lead. The offer on the table was cleaner and larger than anything I had seen in months. The numbers matched the practical need, the shortfall on my rent, the final fees to the lawyer, the overdue card debt. I read the message with my palms sweating and a calm like the one that follows a plunge into cold water. I was surprised at how little I trembled. I did the things Aria had taught me in ways that were boring and precise. I accepted the call. I showed up on time. I asked clear questions about scope and payment. My voice had an unfamiliar steadiness. When they proposed terms, I felt the old reflex to cave. I stopped myself and spoke from the state I'd rehearsed in the ritual, present, honest, and anchored. I am available to lead this with clear deliverables, I said. My fee reflects the value and timelines we discussed. No salesmanship, no desperation, an offer. They said yes. The handshake over the phone felt like a small reparation. There were micro events that read like paperwork and yet felt like miracles. The payments were wired within days. The bank cleared a hold that had been frozen for weeks after I produced a plan. The landlord accepted the partial payment and delayed the notice. One by one, the ropes that had bound me loosened. Each small unclenching was a signal to the next. I still walked into the bank branch with the old hollow in my throat. The teller's counter smelled of lemon cleaner and paper. My hands wanted to check the balance before the transfer and then judge themselves. I used a loop I invented in that line, soft, declarative, and "So," he said after a long pause, "you paid it off." "Yes," I said. I held the sentence like a simple stone. "And I am rebuilding." He did not laugh. He did not convert. He listened and then, in his own way, gave a smaller permission. "Be careful," he said. "But good." I learned that results could be given a shape and still be fragile. They required stewardship. That became a new line in my ledger, safety plus expansion. The rituals had opened doors. My job had become to sit in the doorway and manage passage. The proofs were now cumulative. They were not theatrical miracles, but the predictable multiplication of small, disciplined acts. And still there was a quiet question that hovered like a shadow at the edge of daylight. Could a life rebuilt on such subtle alignments remain when scrutiny or misfortune returned? How durable was this code without its mentor present? A new test was coming. I felt it like a current before a storm. I did not know its face, but I knew the choice: to steward what I had been given, or to let the old scripts of fear take back control. The next step would ask me to operate from the code, alone. The understanding did not come as a single flash. It was accretive, like dawn drawing color across the sky. One night, weeks after the contracts and payments, I sat on the small balcony of the apartment I now called mine. The city breathed below tires, a distant radio, a neighbor late with a laundry basket. The violet sliver from my crystal cut across the terrace wall and painted my palms. I felt, for the first time in a long while, unhurried. Aria's last words folded back into me. The universe does not distinguish between your fear and your desire. It answers to what you project as real. I turned this sentence into practice. If every feeling was a command, then feelings could be trained. If feelings were trained, so were outcomes. I began to build habits that resembled apparatuses in a lab. A morning ritual took 5 minutes. Stand at the window, palms on the sill, count the breath. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6, then voice a statement as if it were already true. The phrasing mattered. Language tethered the internal state to external structure. My internal script became specific and concrete. 2 original loops carried me through the day. I used them like tools. The first: I spoke quietly when action was required. I state my worth. I act with care. I steward the flow. The second was my evening seal. I close the day with thanks. I let the result land. I sleep contained. They sounded ridiculous in the abstract. In practice, they were like aligning physical gears. I learned to translate the rituals into conversations. When a vendor pushed to lower payment, I practiced an external script that came from the ritual's state rather than from negotiation tactics. I looked him in the eye and said plainly, "I value the work and the terms we agreed. If the scope changes, let us revise the terms together." No apology, no urgency, a steady rhythm in my voice that matched the inner loop. He adjusted. We kept the work. Practical examples accumulated in the pattern of everyday life. A former client who had been a string of late payments asked for a pro bono review. Instead of the automatic yes, I invoked a boundary. I can help in a limited scope. I will reserve more substantial time for paid priority clients. The client respected it and then recommended me to another firm that paid well. A young woman from the neighborhood I mentored used the budgeting worksheets I taught to secure a scholarship. She sent a picture of herself outside the university gates. The image landed like evidence. These principles could be translated and taught. Physically, the change was simple. Sleep required no pills more than 3 nights a week. My shoulders lost the habitual slope. My voice settled lower, steadier. I stopped saying, "I hope," as often and replaced it with "I prepare" and "I allow." The inner language shaped what my hands did. Aria's teachings, stripped of spectacle, became protocols. Protocol A: declare the state from the body, not from thought. Protocol B: visualize with the full sensory load, texture, temperature, sound, then attach gratitude to it in present tense. Protocol C. When fear rises, notice the sensation, name it aloud, and return to the breath count. Each protocol was a rehearsal for being in a different reality. I did not become a zealot. The code demanded care. I opened my accounts to an advisor, and we drafted a plan that included emergency reserves and scaled investments. Aria had not told me to ignore risk. It had asked me to stop being ruled by reactive scarcity. One evening, a young man named Diego came to the table at the community center where I had started a free workshop. He held a stack of receipts and a worried look. We sat under the fluorescent light that buzzed like a moth. I taught him how to read the pattern in his spending and how to set a simple rule. Pay yourself first, even if it is a small amount. Diego left with a folded list and later sent a message that he had managed to save his first month. This kind of replication was its own solidity. I also learned the language to speak with family. When my daughter called about tuition, I did not promise instant fixes. I offered a plan, a timeline, and a feeling rehearsed out loud. I am making room. I will steward this. We will find a way. The voice was not grandiose. It was steady. Her relief was audible through the receiver. Aria's disappearance had not removed the instruction set. It left me with a manual of emergent habits that could be practiced, refined, and, crucially, taught. The illumination was practical. It asked for skill, not surrender. At nights, in the quiet between one breath and the next, I still half expected that familiar presence. It did not return. Instead, the lesson stayed alive in small acts. The way I negotiated, the way I paid an assistant on time, the way I turned down a predatory offer and redirected that energy to mentoring. The cosmic had been domesticated into technique. Still, the work was personal, and it required humility. There were moments of vanity and impulse to tell the story as proof of authority. I resisted. The code did not want testimonial conversions. It wanted steady practice. The power was in the day-by-day. One night, alone in the office, I whispered a loop that had become my quiet backbone. I hold the state. I speak the fact. I open my hands. It felt like setting a compass. The needle did not spin. There was, however, an internal question that would not be answered by practice alone. Could I give this gift without turning it into a ladder of ego? The next step would ask me to pass it on without claiming ownership of the truth. The departure of Aria was a call to service, not to spectacle. The mentor's last injunction echoed. Prepare for surrender and for reception. I was practicing both. Aria's final departure was quieter than anything my fear had imagined. It did not leave a vanishing fanfare. One night, as I sat with my hands folded over the crystal I kept on my desk, the air thinned and the violet light in the gem pulsed once, like a slow heartbeat. A tone entered my chest low and clear, then the presence dissolved into a sliver of light that lifted and spread across the room, like dust catching a sunbeam. It felt less like an ending than a handing over. Before it faded completely, something small fell into my open palm. A pebble of light encapsulated in the crystal, warm as if freshly held. I placed it on the shelf above my ledger, and it cast a violet thread along the wall when the sun hit it. I never pretended the stone had magic. It was a talisman in the way a photograph is an object that reminded me of an interior state I could access. I tried to describe what followed and found that words often overstayed their welcome. The real change lived in simple routines. I taught the 3 rituals to a handful of people I trusted, not as doctrine, but as exercises. We practiced the breath counts, the sensory visualizations, the present tense gratitude. I did not recruit. I offered. Some tried and left. A few came back transformed in modest yet true ways. A barber who recalibrated his accounts and finally paid himself a wage. A young mother who used the visualization to remember the small joy she deserved. My work shifted. I was still an accountant, but I found myself teaching not only how to balance books, but how to balance attention. I ran short courses for community youth budgeting sessions intercut with 5-minute practices to steady posture and breath. I spoke plainly about responsibility. The code did not absolve work. It made work clearer. There were practical changes that measured the arc of my life. The code's proof had become less spectacular and more ordinary, and that ordinariness felt like a different kind of miracle. I kept the crystal on my desk, but did not let it become an idol. Most mornings I practiced by silence and breath. Most evenings I wrote down 3 things I had stewarded that day, small tests of care, and I closed with a loop. I plant the feeling. I water the vision. I allow the harvest. That loop had the scent of ritual and the muscle of routine. Sometimes, at 3:33 a.m., I woke and listened to the city. The old tremors came and went. I would sit up, place my feet on the floor, and breathe on the counts I had learned. Instead of fear, a small grin would sometimes appear in awareness of being awake to my own making. These were private acknowledgments. They were not proofs for others. I never stopped teaching numbers. But I also taught a new grammar of engagement. How to speak value without apology, how to rehearse a feeling of enough, how to tenderly steward what arrives. I watched young people lean into practical habits, payroll done on time, an emergency fund that breathed. Those changes ripple out. Aria had left me with a responsibility I had not asked for, to keep the code simple and to protect it from being weaponized. I refused to monetize it as a product. I refused to allow its language to be used as leverage over vulnerable people. The rituals were tools for liberation, not chains for control. That line became my ethic. On a bright afternoon, I took a small class to the riverside with printed sheets and simple exercises. The wind smelled like grass. A woman who had been skeptical on her first visit watched the water move and then, with a small laugh, said, "This actually helps me sleep." Her son kicked a pebble into the current. The scene was small and ordinary and exactly the kind of life I wanted. Before Aria dissipated, it had left a paradox phrased like a question. Will you use knowing to create freedom or to prove a point? I carried that question like a compass. Each time I felt pride swell too large, I returned to the work of service. Each time I received something unexpected, an offer, a windfall, I registered it, and then practiced stewardship, allocating, advising, teaching. There are still moments when people edge toward me with a mix of hope and calculation. I spend the first 5 minutes establishing ground rules, transparency, mutual care, no promises beyond capacity. It is a small ritual of ethics. It keeps the code from becoming a commodity. It keeps me human. Sometimes, late at night, I place my hand on that little crystal and whisper one of the loops, a private benediction. I hold this practice. I pass it with care. I leave room for others to discover their own frequency. The violet sliver on the wall seems to nod. It is not Aria. It is the trace of what I learned. The mentor never came back in the luminous way it had first appeared, but its teaching persisted less as instruction and more as a method, a set of habits I had integrated into my bones. In the end, the true departure was not Aria's leaving, but my readiness to keep working without its visible presence. Sometimes, when I stand by the window and watch the city pulse, I remember Aria's last rhythm. I listen. I breathe. I decide again and again to be the steward of my life. The code is no longer foreign. It is my muscle. And yet, at the edge of that certainty, there is another question that keeps me honest. What will I become if I keep this practice for the rest of my life? The answer is not finished. It is a road that opens as I walk it. Sometimes I wake at 3:33 and for a breath or two the room remembers the first night. The air hangs cooler near the window. The crystal on my shelf throws a thin violet line across the ceiling. I place my hand on it and feel the glass warm like a pocket of sun. My chest lifts. The city outside is a distant drum. Inside, everything is quieter and clear. I have learned to treat those hours as a threshold. I sit on the edge of the bed. I feel the floor under my feet solid, grainy, real. I count the inhale, hold the stillness, release. The breath is not a trick. It is an instrument that tunes the body to a different pitch. The sound of my own exhale becomes a small bell. I say nothing at first. I wait until the waiting softens. When Aria left, it left a phrase folded into my bones. Prepare for surrender and for reception. I practice both. Surrender is the letting go of urgency. Reception is the discipline of attention. They look the same in practice, both require me to soften and then choose. The crystal on my desk is no longer a relic of spectacle. It is a tool for remembering the posture of reception. I built a ritual that is small and repeatable. It fits in pockets, in elevators, in the pause before a phone call. I call it the 3-minute return. Find the light. Place your palms near your belly. Breathe 4 in, 2 hold, 6 out. Name one thing that is already true for you, not a wish, a fact of inner tone. Feel your shoulders drop. Send a short phrase into the room. I align my breath. I call allowance. I receive with care. It sounds simple because it is. It works because it reorders the nervous system. There are mornings when I still test what I learned with the blunt instruments of the world. A supplier challenges a line item. I feel the old tightness at the throat. I look at the invoice, breathe, speak the fact. I value the work and I honor the terms. My voice stays low but firm. The exchange resolves. The agreement stands. The world does not collapse because I choose steadiness. I am mindful, now, of the danger of turning this into another product. The code is not a course to be sold as a shortcut. It is a set of refinements for attention. I refuse to package it as a fast route. I will not build a hierarchy of those who know and those who do not. Instead, I teach small groups, for free, in a back room of the community center. I hand out photocopies of simple ledgers, and we practice the breath together. The room smells of coffee and ink. A barber comes and learns to pay himself on time. A young mother discovers a rhythm that lets her sleep without pills 3 nights a week. These are proof. I keep records the way I was trained to. Neat columns, conservative forecasts, emergency reserves. I also keep a different kind of ledger. Each night, I write 3 things I steward well: a bill paid on time, a boundary held, a small kindness given. The list is quiet. The habit is louder than my old stories of failure. There were choices that still cost me. I lost a client who wanted aggressive promises I would not make. My brother Eduardo shook his head and kept his distance longer than I expected. He is not a villain. He is the truth I once wore like armor. His skepticism sharpened me. When he visits now, he notices the crystal and smirks, and then stays a moment longer. Transformations arrive on different timetables. I learned to pass the code without insisting it be believed. I invite. I do not convert. Once, after a short workshop by the riverside, a woman came back with a thermos of soup and said, "Your breathing exercise helped my son stop waking at night." Another student sent a message months later. She had started a small bookkeeping business and paid herself her first salary. These are the small replications that matter. They do not feel like proof to the cynic, but they feel like music to me. There is a ritual I use when I must make a public decision. I go to the window, cup my hands as if holding light, and say aloud a concise set of words that create my frame. I do this now, for you who listen. I align my breath. I call allowance. I receive with care. I say it twice, a little softer the second time, until the words sit under my ribs like a foundation. The words do not guarantee outcome. They guarantee my posture. Let me offer a tiny practice, if you stay with me for a minute. Sit comfortably, eyes open or closed, as you prefer. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold 2. Exhale for 6. Picture one small thing you want to steward this week: a call, a bill, a conversation. Feel the texture of success, the weight of an envelope, the click of a sent message, the warmth of a returned voice. Say quietly to yourself, I prepare the place. I meet it with calm. I allow the result to arrive. Breathe out. Open your eyes. Repeat twice more, slowly. That is it. A small exercise. A shift in register. I have also written a few loops that live in my pocket. When doubt rides up my spine, I whisper them, like a technician checking instruments. I plant attention. I tend to signal. I let the outcome land. Or I say, I steady my body. I name the fact. I act with care. Each variation is a tool. The word, they laughed sometimes. They nodded other times. The bridge between number and practice is narrower than it seems. At night, I still have a private language with myself. Not slogans, but short commands that settle the body. I say, I plant the seed. I water the field. I allow the harvest. Or, softer, I keep this state. I speak the fact. I open my hands. These are my operating phrases. They are not promises to the world. They are contracts I make with my nervous system. I do not claim to have mapped the entire terrain. I learned 3 rituals that changed my life: declaration, visualization, projected gratitude, and then I learned how to live alongside them. What surprised me most was not that the world shifted, but how small the daily acts needed to be to hold that shift. The code is less thunder, more architecture. It asks for steady maintenance. If you have stayed until the end, thank you. If this resonated, tell me where you are from. Leave a comment with your city and country. If this voice helped you accept a small practice, subscribe and come back. I am building nothing that needs an audience to shine, but your stories matter. They help me shape how I teach, how I hold the code with tenderness rather than claim. There is one thing Aria whispered before it dissolved into the warm pebble on my palm. It was a question more than a command. What will you become if you practice this for a life? I have been walking toward the answer slowly. Some days I am only willing to say, I am learning to be a steward. Other days I see a clearer path, teaching without owning, offering without selling, receiving without clutching. The portal is quieter now than it was in the beginning. It no longer opens with heraldic light. It opens in the small rhythm of a breath. Yet sometimes, on certain nights, the violet sliver on my shelf throws a longer thread across the wall. I feel a possibility at the lip of the ordinary. I do not know what will step through the next time, and perhaps that is the point. To keep practicing, to keep the field ready. A single question stays with me, and I'll leave it with you like a small key. What frequency will you choose to become?